This is going to be a preview with a difference, as it's more of a debate. I'm a huge fan of Envoi Allen myself, and I'll be arguing the case for him. Ryan will be in the corner of Monkfish. As strange as it sounds, I'd be less concerned about the jumping of Envoi rather than Monkfish in this.
I disagree on having any doubts with Monkfish jumping. I think, first of all, you have to question whether Envoi will stay the trip.
He'll have absolutely no concerns going right-handed at all.
Emphatic, Monkfish takes the round advisory.
He finished with so much in hand, he could have just galloped all day that day.
Hello and welcome to the oddschecker betting show. I'm your host Steve Ryder, and this is a Punchestown preview with a difference. Today I'm joined by Roy and Morgan when we're here to discuss the Champion Novice Chase as Monkfish takes on Envoi Allen over the 3-mile distance. First of all, Ryan, thanks for joining me on the show. Before we kick off, how are you, and why don't you tell the watchers a little bit about yourself and how you got into racing?
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, I'm all good. All good, thank you. Funny story how I got into racing. It's not the same as probably anyone else who I've sort of spoken to from a racing background. I have no racing background. I didn't grow up knowing anyone who was into horse racing. It was something that I sort of started watching myself. And my partner could see I was watching it sort of day in, day out, trying to learn. And I was following all these different social media outlets, just trying to gather knowledge. And she brought us tickets to the 2018 Clarence House Chase, which was the first proper big meeting I went to, I think, when Underso beat Speradec. And we had our £5 each way, like you do with the on-course bookmakers at the time. I was new into racing, didn't have much knowledge. I was just guessing at that point. And I just said to her, I said, I'd love to work on course. I said, I think it's something I could do. On weekends, I'd love it. I'd learn a lot more about racing. So I've never looked back since then, and I've worked 2 Cheltenham Festivals. I've worked for the Grand National Meeting. I've done Royal Ascot. I've done 2 Epsom Derbies. So it's all from sort of 2018 onwards. My life has just been racing, which is a different background to what a lot of people have taken. I've had to learn everything myself as well. But yeah, it's been really good fun along the way, and it is the number one sport out there for me.
For anyone that wants to follow you, it's RGM Racing on Twitter. So, as I've mentioned, this is going to be a preview with a difference, as it's more of a debate, really. The Punchestown Festival begins on Tuesday, and undoubtedly one of the biggest pools is a potential face-off between the 2 of the most exciting Irish-trained novice chasers. I'm a huge fan of Envoi Allen myself, and I'll be arguing the case for him, while Ryan will be in the corner of Monkfish. The bookmakers have Monkfish a slight favourite at even money, with Envoi Allen 11-10, but I'm sure the markets will flip-flop at times in the run-up to the race. So make sure you keep an eye on the oddschecker app so you get the best price available. We've got 5 main discussion topics that we'll go through in this debate. The first being how they fared at Cheltenham, which Ryan and I are going to watch the footage and obviously just make some comments throughout the race. The track, the distance, the jumping, and their form. So we're lucky enough to have the footage of the Cheltenham races. So we will then have a few comments as we watch the races. First of all, kicking off with Monkfish. So we join, I think this is just before 2 out. So Ryan, why don't you talk us through Monkfish?
He travelled well throughout the race. His jumping was a bit sketchy, and you can see the loose horse there on the outside didn't do him any favours at all, even turning in now. But all of the horses in behind are well off the bridle. He's had the race won here. He's just got to get home from here, really.
Monkfish in front, penultimate fence, jumps soundly.
He's heading down towards the last now, and you can see the loose horse just taking him off course a little bit, and he just dived at it, flicked his back legs, and I think he was lucky to stay up there.
Fence gets in tight, hits it halfway up, sends Birch flying in 1,000 directions, but he's 4 lengths ahead of Fiddler on the roof.
Yeah, I think that just showed how much kind of stamina he had left and how much kind of he still had in the tank, really. I think if that was a tired horse, I think he'll probably have, he will have fallen at that fence. So it kind of just showed how much he still had in hand late on in the race. And then we should be able to watch Envoi. Unfortunately, we won't be watching the end of the race in terms of obviously Envoi Allen, but we'll watch the first bit of it. I think the run up and the preparation to this race was the big thing with him. He was a lot more buzzy early on in the preliminaries. Kind of Jack Kennedy was at pains to settle in mid-pack on the run up to the first, and he actually jumps the first couple really well, nice and settled in between runners, wherein obviously his small field novice chases in Ireland in the preparation for this, he had a good sight at his fences. So I was, as an Envoi backer, I was quite happy at this point.
Yeah, I think you would have been happy how he lined up. But I think looking back at it, there was so much pace in the race. Prior to this, he hadn't actually had any pace in all of the races. He was leading from the front. So like you say, he might have had a bit of a sight issue at the fences and possibly just required this run for experience. Would have been good if he could have lasted a bit longer, but he was travelling well throughout.
Yeah, just look how keen he is here. I mean, it's one of the things obviously we're going to touch on is the distance. Envoi Allen hadn't obviously been up at 3 miles here. In his previous races, he'd given himself a really good chance of getting the added trip. And he's just keen in Jack Kennedy's hands here.
Who has a break of a couple of lengths back to Dava Star, and the back marker is Black Bow as they go the next, and down is Envoi Allen.
He didn't look right going down to post, did he? As opposed to his usual calm self. But you thought the class horse that he is, it wouldn't have caused him a problem.
Yeah, and it's the first mistake he's really made over fences so far in his career. So that's the first discussion topic, I suppose. Monkfish definitely holds the upper hand. If we're comparing, obviously, the Cheltenham run, seeing as his was a victorious one where Envoi obviously fell. We'll then go on to the track. So Punchestown is obviously going to be a test for both of them. Monkfish is obviously on this 7-race winning sequence at the minute. It could, for me, prove significant that his 2 defeats earlier on in his career came on right-handed tracks. I know he's improved since stepping up in distance and they were over a shorter trip. But his other victories at Fairyhouse and Thurles going that way round have come in weak contests. His best performances have both come at Leopardstown and at Cheltenham, whereas Envoi kind of has that proven Grade 1 class going right-handed. His defeat of Abacadabras in the Royal Bond last season just shows that he'll have absolutely no concerns going right-handed at all. He also has that added jumping experience of a fence at Punchestown with his victory in a Grade 3 Novice Chase here in January. I know that turned into a bit of a non-event with the fall of Asterion and Flange, but it's just quite good, I suppose, in the terms of Envoi that he has gone round there and jumped round clean at Punchestown. What are your thoughts on? Have you got any concern around the track at all for Monkfish?
I don't have a huge concern. Obviously, he was beaten here earlier in his career. He's always finished in the top 2, so it wasn't too disappointing on that occasion over a trip far too short for him. But he's very versatile. He's won at 5 different tracks, including his point, so he can go either way round. He's got stamina, so he's not going to have a problem in the stamina department. And I think the track will help that. Stiff gallop, long finish, and right-handed is no issue for me. Envoi has proved as well he can go right-handed, so I think it's going to be a case of who can get the lead on this track to take the advantage. They're both going to want to be prominent, so I think it's just a case of who can get that advantage at the start, and they'll both come flying home, I'm sure.
Definitely. I think that's probably a draw on the track department, possibly a bit towards Envoi, if I'm being critical. Distance, this is definitely one where Monkfish is going to have the upper hand. I'll let you take it away with discussion on the distance.
I think first of all you have to question whether Envoi will stay the trip. He hasn't gone beyond 2 mile 4 so far in his career, and he doesn't scream like he needs the extra distance. I haven't seen that in his races. He's always finished them off well, but he's never sort of got caught idling or been caught going slow and looks like he needs that extra distance. He'd be as good over 2 miles as he is over 2 mile 4, I think. So I don't see the edge that he needs a 3 mile trip. I think it's just a case of them trying to take this opportunity at the end of the season to see how good he really is. Where Monkfish can win over 2.5, he's won over 3. He's proven he's got stamina. When he won over 2 mile 5 at Leopardstown when he beat latest exhibition, he showed he had a huge turn of foot there. He finished with so much in hand. He could have just galloped all day that day. And I think the same again here. I think he'll just gallop, and you've just got to try catch him really from the front.
Yeah, I do agree. His improvement definitely has come since stepping up to 3 miles. There's absolutely no concerns around the distance for Monkfish. It is a question mark for Envoi. Before his run at Cheltenham, I would have said that he'd easily be able to get 3 miles because he just seemed to settle so well in his races. Davy Russell in the past just seemed to be able to put him exactly where he wanted in races, and he'd give himself definitely a chance of getting that extra distance in time over 3 miles. But as we saw in that video, he was just very buzzy in the preliminaries early on in the race of the Marsh. I'm just hoping that he settles a bit better in this contest to give himself a chance of getting this 3 mile trip. I know you have to take it with a pinch of salt when you hear things like this, but everyone always talked about him as a potential Gold Cup horse in the future. and it wouldn't be a huge concern for me. The 3 mile trip, the 3 mile 2 trip around Cheltenham might be a different thing, but 3 miles around Punchestown, it wouldn't be a huge negative for me for Envoi, if I'm being honest. We'll then move on to jumping. Now, this is definitely an area where both horses could definitely improve. You'd actually have both of them down as having them as a huge positive coming into the Cheltenham Festival. Neither had really made a mistake over fences so far, and it was definitely a huge positive for them going into the race. As strange as it sounds, I'd be less concerned about the jumping of Envoi rather than Monkfish in this. Sometimes a fall just helps a horse realise the boundaries of making a mistake, I suppose, and you just know Henry de Bromhead will have done plenty of school with him. The stable just seemed to be able to get horses to jump. The amount of novice hurdlers that improve going novice chasing is ridiculous. And that would be kind of the huge positive in the switch of stables from Gordon Elliott to Henry de Bromhead, in my opinion. Monkfish, on the other hand, obviously made, as we saw in the video, some errors. We didn't see the ones earlier on in the race, but his terrible mistake at the last, where he was lucky to survive, the fact he didn't fall might just mean that he hasn't learnt to give them the respect they deserve, and he could well plough for a few in this race. So, as strange as it sounds, jumping actually wouldn't be my biggest concern for Envoi in this. What are your thoughts?
I disagree on having any doubts with Monkfish jumping. I think he's been foot perfect, as has Envoi up to the festival. Both been absolutely foot perfect. You couldn't pick out any mistakes off the top of your head from prior to the festival. I think Monkfish jumps very well. He pulls through his fences. The jockey sits. He doesn't need to push him through them. He pulls the jockey up through the fences. He knows where to take off and where to land, and you don't need to ask him to do that. And so far, it's been the same for Envoi, but he's always been given that early pace that he's had to aim at. And as you've seen with the fall at Cheltenham, he was mid-pack. He was a bit flustered in there and sort of just snatched at a few. But jumping, they're both sound jumpers. I think they'll both be able to see their fences. They'll probably be side by side at the start going down to the first, so they'll both be able to see the fences. And I don't see it being a concern for Monkfish at all. Envoi's obviously got to recover from that fall. It's a confidence thing with him. I'm sure they've done plenty of schooling with him, and they need to sort of get him back to his confident self, or he actually has no chance here if he can't hold up his jumping.
Yeah, you wouldn't expect either of them to be kind of making a mistake late on, even if they are under pressure, really, given that they were so impressive earlier on this season. We'll then move on to their form. So I suppose this is the biggest debate between the two of them. A lot's been made of Envoi's form over fences. He hasn't beaten a lot, whereas Monkfish definitely has beaten more over fences. But I'll leave it to you really to go first on form. You can make your case for why Monkfish is stronger than Envoi's.
Well, it's simple. Monkfish's novice chasing form is tenfold what Envoi's shown so far. Envoi hasn't had the opportunity to show it. I fully appreciate that. But when he has had the opportunities, he hasn't been pushed out to show how good he really is. So if you go back to Monkfish's debut, you can see he's beaten good horses. He beat Sam's Profile, Diolka, and Ascaria 10 as well by huge distances. Ascaria 10 was 15 lengths behind. He's now rated 151. So you look at the form of that race and you think if he's going to improve for that, he's going to be a really good horse. And then he came out and beat Latest Exhibition, who's now rated 155 and ran really well in the Irish National, 3 lengths, before going on to run in a race that probably didn't suit over 2 mile 5 and beating him 11 lengths. So he again improved, and the form just ties in massively there. He beat Conflated by half the track. He's beat Heaven Help Us by half the track. He's beat a lot of these good horses by huge distances, whereas Envoi's just beaten these 135, 140 horses by 5-6 lengths. And I think he needs massive improvement. I don't know if you agree on that.
On his fences form, there is no comparison, is there? I mean, yeah, you're looking at Monkfish defeating Latest Exhibition and Andy Dufresne. Like, Envoi hasn't done that. I mean, if you're going really sort of strictly back through the form, he beat Assemble by a big distance, and he went on to finish 5th in the Paddy Power Plate of 148. So there are some solid bits of form back there, and I think it's just the fact that Envoi, he just idles at the finish, doesn't he? He's never really one that's gonna win by a huge distance. But the form really of his form over fences doesn't really concern me. He's good enough. He's got the class. That champion bumper defeat of Time Hill and Abracadabras just shows how good a horse he is. I know they would have both, well, Time Hill definitely would have obviously needed further. He beat Abracadabras and Darva Star in the Royal Bond. Darva Star obviously went on to run well in a Champion Hurdle. and then beat Elixir Dane at Naas as well over hurdles. It's such a shame, isn't it, that we didn't get to see the best of Easy Work, because he could have been a proper horse over fences, and it would have just provided a bit of substance to that Ballymore form, which does, albeit back in hindsight, look a weak race, doesn't it, with the likes of the big Guess Away and Sham Blue not really living up to what we thought they might be earlier on in the season. But yeah, form, definitely Monkfish has that over fences, but that previous hurdles form of Envoi is rock solid, isn't it? I think before we obviously go and we talk around other horses and we conclude, other points to obviously put on is the stable switch for Envoi. He leaving Gordon Elliott and joining Henry de Bromhead so late on in that season, so close to the Cheltenham Festival, wouldn't have been ideal. He didn't seem himself in the preliminaries. I'm just definitely hoping that he'll be more himself in the prelims of this one. We'll just quickly touch on the others in the race. I don't think it will really concern. It really is kind of a two-horse race. It appears that Cole Reevy's last run is going to be in this before she goes off to the breeding shed. She hasn't actually got too much to find on ratings, given her mare's allowance. And it remains to be seen if Willie Mullins runs any of his others, the likes of Janadil and Asterion for launch. But this really is kind of the big clash between the big two, in my opinion. Have you got anything else to add?
Just the stable switch I'll touch on. I think that was a huge impact as to why Envoi potentially didn't perform at the festival. Like you say, he was buzzy in the prelims. I think maybe there was rumours going around. I don't know how light they were, that he wasn't happy when he moved stables. He wasn't his self-schooling and things like that. So you always take that into consideration. And when you look at the price he went off at Cheltenham, you think, God, maybe I should have opposed him, because the way he travelled, the way he went down to the prelims, you'd have thought he doesn't look happy in himself. But in terms of other opposition, I don't think there's too much to beat there. One stat I have got, which is great for Willie Mullins backers, is if you backed all of his last 1,772 races at Punchestown, you'd be £12 up to level stakes. And if you think over that period of time, that's actually a phenomenal strike rate to have. Whereas you look at, in the same comparison, that's over the same time, he's minus 234 at Ferry House, minus 101 at Leopardstown, and minus 68 at Cheltenham. So I'd have no concerns about him coming into this meeting, because he absolutely loves it, and I'm sure he'll be cleaning up big prizes again. Yeah,
this is normally in the past couple of seasons where Gordon Elliott's still been ahead on prize money, and then Mullins just has an unreal Punchestown and ends up winning the Trainers' Championship once again. Thanks for listening to the Oddschecker betting show. Please make sure you like and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more previews of the biggest betting events in sport. Our full Punchestown Festival preview with Andy Holding and Ed Quigley will be published on Monday, the 26th of April. And finally, don't forget to download the Oddschecker app for all the best odds, best offers, and best tips.